Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing for Wednesday, July 27th. There's no midweek match to preview today, but with me to discuss the latest news is Alison McConnell. How's things, Alison? All good?
Very well, thanks. How's yourself, Sean?
Yeah, all right. Aye, not too bad. It's a nice day, so again, obviously got my hoodie on. So yeah, as always, before we start, we need to have a wee word for our sponsors, OneFootball. So get downloading the app from all the usual app stores, guys, and via the link in the description of this video. It's, as Tony always says, your one-stop shop for stuff like scores and lineups, etc., etc. Just below that on the screen, as you can see, our £3 for 3 months full access to the website deal is still ongoing. It's the last few days of that actually now, so if you want to take advantage of that, now's the time. All you need to do is go to www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe, and as always, I'll put the link in the comments for you as well. Now, Alison, first topic of the day is something Celtic and Ange Postecoglou had to deal with a lot in the first half of last season, and that's injury setbacks. It's been reported that midfielder Yosuke Ideguchi has picked up an injury in training. Now, it's the week of the season opener. He played in 5 of Celtic's 6 pre-season friendlies to varying degrees of success, I'd argue, but nonetheless, he was consistently involved, Alison. Given he got an injury on his first start against Allo Athletic back in February and then rarely featured after that, to pick up another one, no matter how minor or how serious it is, in the days before the first competitive game of the new season after you've played a decent part in preparations, it's just so frustrating for him, eh?
Absolutely. I think that's a word for it. I think on a personal level, he'll be really irritated. I think an opportunity opening up to maybe go and force his way into the team, and then a further setback after the one that he had after he just arrived at the club. So I'm sure on a human level, you would feel a bit of sympathy for him, because it must be incredibly frustrating just to be on the cusp of a new season and a fresh campaign and a fresh opportunity to go and make a mark, and then find yourself set back again.
Patrick McLaughlin with a comment saying things just seem to be transpiring against Yosuke Ideguchi, I suppose, against the boy. It's so frustrating for him and for all of us. I think that probably echoes quite a lot of fan sentiment, Alison, because you've not really had a chance to see what it can truly offer, because you need not only a run of games, but a run of match fitness to get that run of games, and then kind of start showing your quality. It's all counted against him so far. In pre-season, I thought he started off with a good display against Viner Victoria, but really after that, I would say he's not really stood out. Given Ange Postecoglou's comments, though, about this season being an important one for him, and this was even before the end of last season, he was saying things like this. I think the expectation, as kind of Patrick alluded to, is that you just expected to see him more involved. The other thing I would argue, or I would put to you, is does signing Aaron Moy perhaps actually impact on his chances of game time as much as perhaps James McCarthy's, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's a consideration, but I would also say that he came with a reputation of offering a versatility. He came with being able to play in multiple positions. So I think that would be quite intriguing to see if he could fit in the team in different areas of the pitch. But yeah, I think there will be a real frustration on his part. I think big things too have been expected of his fellow countrymen, given the fact that they came and they all made very significant impacts. I think he'll feel that he's still got a point to prove to the Celtic support, and that he's got a chance. He needs a chance to go and show what he has to offer, and I think it just boils down to a real frustration. I think just a real sense of impotency when you have an injury like that just sets you back a bit, because as you say, you need games, you need game time, you need match fitness. And I think when the season starts, if you miss 2 or 3 games, it feels like you're maybe playing catch up, and it takes a while just to get on to the same plane where everyone else is.
You mentioned his countrymen there, but of course, even the other signing in the January window, Matt O'Reilly, also hit the ground running. Johnny Kenny, obviously, technically was probably a B team signing. You could count that, but it must be. You're right. It must make it extra kind of difficult to properly hit the ground running and properly feel settled in when everyone else that was signed at the same time has not only settled in but thrived. Retro Celtic kind of made a comment here saying Ideguchi's injury now must increase the need for a defensive midfielder. Is that something you agree with, Alison, or is it kind of two separate arguments almost?
Yeah, I see the logic. I know where you're coming from about two separate arguments. I can see where both of you are in terms of the points. I don't think Celtic will sign another midfielder. I think, we've spoken about this before, about I think some supporters would like to see a kind of enforcer type midfielder, somebody that would come in and offer that kind of role. I just don't think it's going to happen now. I think with Aaron Moy coming in, I think that was probably the last of the midfielders to come in. I wouldn't expect another one. I think if there's another signing to come in before the closure of the window, I think I would maybe anticipate another defensive player.
As in like a centre-back again?
Yeah.
Is that like on the kind of proviso that Chris Julian's leaving, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting, because I do still think there's a need for a defensive midfielder, but if Tony's watching it, you don't say it, you say it every week, but they need to be able to do the technical stuff as well, or they get lost in that midfield. But that almost makes it more difficult to actually sign someone, not only because you're looking for a certain profile, which isn't necessarily the kind of profile every defensive midfielder will have, but also because you almost don't need them for a lot of domestic games. You're essentially signing someone at that point for European games, which makes it doubly difficult to find them, identify them, sign them, pay for them, but then you don't really need them for a lot of games, so you also need to find them in the game thing. Yeah, I think that's yeah.
I absolutely see and would appreciate those arguments. I just don't think that the way the manager sets up, the way that he plays game by game, I don't think it will come. I would be very surprised if a player of that ilk arrived at the club before the closure of the window.
Now, speaking as we were of players whose chances of game time are probably limited, the Mikey Johnston loan reports just won't go away, Alison. Now, I know you and Tony spoke about him the other day, so I won't rehash that by just asking should he go on loan, because I think we've done that, we've spoken about that often enough. I think people probably know both of our thoughts on it. But instead, I want to flip it and kind of say, well, why should he stick about, Alison? Because to me, looking at the depth in the wide areas, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to him, by the way, I don't mean why should he stick about because he's not good enough, because I do think he's got bags of potential despite his age, and he's also got a contract till 2025, so it's not that I'm saying, but I mean why should he stick about, because to me he needs to play football, and looking at the depth in the wide areas at the moment, I think it will be extremely hard for him to get minutes, even in a squad that's going to be rotated, because you think on the left he'll have Daisen Maeda and Jota picked ahead of him virtually every week. James Forrest has been used off that side in pre-season as he was in the early stages of last term. That's almost potentially a pull and rank thing, where he's probably not going to get picked over Forrest either. On the other side, Johnston doesn't play off the right, but even if he were to do it in order to get minutes, then Jota also plays off the right now, if Maeda starts on the left. Leila Bada's there, and then you get Forrest again, and that's not even counting any of the young guys that might be knocking on the door, like Owen Moffat or Rocco Vata. So I feel Alison like it's very unlikely that he'll be able to get the minutes that he needs if he's fit. In that sense, I would ask you, is it not about should he go on loan, but why shouldn't he go on loan?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer for all the reasons that you've just given. I think if you look at it very logically, then I think it's extremely hard to make a compelling case to stay at Celtic and push for game time, because I think it's very unlikely to come. I think for the good of his own professional career, he needs to play football. He needs to play competitive football, and it needs to be every week. I think he's a player with tremendous talent. I think he's got a lot to offer. I think he's an exciting player. I think he offers a creativity, but I don't think that he's got enough to get in front of the players that you just mentioned. I think they are all very much ahead of him in the pecking order. And I think what it then boils down to is maybe coming on off the bench for games, or maybe starting the odd game. I don't think that's what he needs at this stage in his career, and I think he probably knows that himself. I think it would be far more beneficial to Celtic and far more beneficial to the player himself to go and get the maturity in his game that comes from regular exposure to first team football. And I think you come back a better player for that. And I think even if it was only to Christmas, if it was only the opening half of the season and then it's reviewed again in January, then I think it just maybe offers scope for consideration. I think there's a lot of people have said that he's maybe not good enough to stay on a permanent basis at Celtic, that they've not seen enough. I think he still could have a future at Celtic, but I think at this moment in time, I think there is a clear need to play on a regular basis.
A few comments coming in. Helen Freaks kind of that is a Mikey doesn't have an end product. He's quite greedy. I don't know if I would say he was quite greedy, but it's his decision making for me. And I think James Daly, one of our columnists, done a data analysis piece on him last week or the week before. I'll dig it out and put it in the comments. Basically showing that at a very base level, he's got a similar profile to the likes of Jota as a winger in terms of the way that he wants to play, the way that he tries to dribble, that kind of thing. But the real sticky point is decision making, which is the hardest thing to coach as well, obviously. But I think part of that decision making kind of frailty, if you want to put it that way, is potentially because he's 23 and he's barely played first team football. So I kind of said it to Tony the other week that although he's 23, I don't really consider him a 23-year-old first team player because he's not got the minutes in the tank to justify that. He's still very much probably an 18 or 19-year-old in terms of actual game time. So for that reason, I do think it would be worth, not only because he's under contract for another 3 years, but just in general terms for his own development, see what it's like when he gets regular game time. Even as you say, if it is till Christmas, see how he does. Is there anything there to suggest he's improving the things like decision making and different things? Because the perception of him just now won't help, and not getting game time certainly won't help. I mean, Jason Lee probably sums up a lot of what people say, which is like it generates more news stories like this than actual playing time. And it's hard to disagree, really, Alison. When I know it's a tongue-in-cheek comment, but he just doesn't play that much, and that to me is the key.
Yeah, and I think there's always a danger, particularly at a club like Celtic, where young players stay too long, where there's an opportunity to go, and I think there might be a fear within Mikey Johnson that's happened, which is why I think the sooner he commits to somewhere that gets regular game time, the better. And I think things like decision making come down to experience. It comes down to doing it under pressure. It comes down to doing it in games. That's where it improves. When you're playing training games, when you're playing behind closed doors, there's not the same tension in a game. There's not the same pressure. I think that only comes with being exposed to it and being exposed to it regularly. And I think he definitely needs it. I think 23 is too old to be pushing for a first team place or be content with being a fringe player. For the benefit of his own career, it's imperative that he goes and plays football. And I think he's good enough to do that. I think, and he's good enough to do it at a decent standard. And I think it will enhance his game entirely. And whether or not he doesn't have a future, whether he has a future at Celtic or whether he doesn't on a long-term basis, it remains crucial for his own development as a player to play now.
There's obviously reports linking him with a move to Standard Liège with Ronnie Dyla and stuff. It's not really that I want to get at today, because obviously it's not really necessarily what we want to talk about. It's more the where does it fit into the narrative of the season so far, what's lying ahead, as I say, the squad depth, as I'm always talking about. And in that sense, I think DMAC's comment just saying that it just fundamentally needs to play more first team games. This is exactly what our point is. But to me, it doesn't need to be at Celtic. If he's not going to get the game time, then that's where I would suggest that the loan move would make sense. It doesn't need to be abroad either. I think loan moves within Scotland have worked out for Celtic in the past as well. As Darren Smith's pointing out, Chris Ayer went to Kilmarnock. I always point to the Ryan Christie one up at Aberdeen, Alison. You know, I go on about that quite a bit. I think it's underrated. I know you pointed out that he took a wee couple of months when he came back, but he still managed to force his way into a squad that had totally dominated in the season he was away. I don't see much downside with sending Mikey Johnston out on loan while there is that level of depth at the wing positions, really.
Completely agree. I think it makes sense for everyone, for all parties concerned. I think it's a sensible option.
Now, the other thing, I suppose, that you could, it's almost like the Liam Scales scenario now, where Jim Goodwin's already saying that he wants to sign him. You're almost a catch-22 if you're the club that loan him without an option to buy, because say Mikey Johnston went out on loan and actually hit the heights that people think he can, there's no chance that a club in Scotland is going to be able to afford him at that point. But almost from Celtic's point of view, it's win-win, because you either take him back and give him his chance, or you then sell him for bigger money than you otherwise would have if he wasn't playing at Celtic. So there's also that to think on as well.
Of course, absolutely. But I think key to it all is the development of the player.
Mm-hmm.
I think at 23, you should be aiming to have a bank of first team games there. I think you have to have hit a certain number. I think other than that, there's a real danger of stagnating, of not development and not developing full potential.
Yeah, well, I mentioned a couple of names in that conversation there. And the next topic I'm going to talk about is the kind of the B team and potential other people that could break through. Now, I mentioned Rocco Vata and kind of Owen Moffat and stuff there that play out wide or have played out wide when they've been involved with the first team. They were part of a clutch of B team and youth players, Alison, who were given chances in pre-season. Now, some only made one appearance in the first game against Feyenoord Victoria when international players were being rested, but some played more than once. Boston Lowell, for instance, got 5 appearances under his belt across the 6 games. The reason I bring up the B team, though, is that they lost to Berwick Rangers last night in the Lowland League, which prompted Stephen McManus to say that it just wasn't good enough. But also, he said this sentence, which was, all of the boys feel that at the moment they're on the cusp of first-team football, but they have a long way to go. Now, maybe that's what, if I was still sub-editing Alison, that's what I'd tell my reality check, in a way. Because in that starting 11 last night, 7 were with the first team in Austria only a couple of weeks ago. Toby Oluwayemi, Josh Dede, Boston Lowell, Matthew Anderson, Rocco Vata, Ben Summers and Johnny Kenny. Now, you can't read that much into one game in the Lowland League, and obviously Stephen McManus was talking in the aftermath of that game and not in a general point about their first team chances, but did any of them show anything in pre-season to you to say that they might have put themselves in Postecoglou's thinking for squad minutes over the first half of the season?
I think Rocco Vata was the one who caught the eye. I think there's been a lot of chat about him over the last 18 months or so, both at international and at club level for what he's achieved. And I think he took his goal well when he came on and scored over in Austria. I think the comments were very interesting. I would agree with you. I think it kind of pointed to a wee, just remember where you are and how far you've still got to go, and just a reminder that you need to be performing every day and in every game and in every session. I think it's incredibly difficult to get into a team like Celtic. I think the pressure is incredible when you get in. I think there can never be a drop-off in level of performance at first-team level. I think the demands on the club. There's an expectation to go and win every game. I think the standard is set by Ange Postecoglou in the first team, and I think coming into it would probably be fairly daunting. So I think coming in and for a young player to come in and force their way in, I think it probably is about as much as mentality as it is about ability. And I think it will just be interesting to see over the course of the campaign who does appear on the fringes, who maybe makes a match squad, who maybe gets some minutes, because these aren't things that are given cheaply. They're given real consideration. And I think it will be an indication of the coaching that is seen every day at Lennoxtown about what the perception is among the coaching staff about those who have the opportunity, who maybe can go and genuinely make it into the first team. Because the hardest thing to do in football, I think, is to cross from just where these players are now into the first team and do it properly to cement a place in a first team squad. I think it's incredibly difficult. I think if you look at the percentages who achieve it, it tells its own story. It's incredibly fraught to make that final step in football, to make it just from youth level into first team level. It's tremendously tough.
Jim Stevenson correctly pointed out that Hearts B actually beat Berwick 6-0 in the game prior to Berwick beating Celtic, which I think was the source of a lot of Stephen McManus's frustration after it. A couple of comments about the B team in general. Tim Anon saying none of them are ready to stake a claim. Andrew Galea echoing that, saying they're miles away. I don't know if they're miles away. Personally, in pre-season, I like the look and the attitude of Johnny Kenny, but his only outing was against Feyenoord Victoria. So you would really have had to have seen him up against a much better organised team to comment fully, Alison, I would argue. Aside from that, Boston Lowell, as I say, he played a part in 5 out of the 6 games. He had some good moments. He had some moments that kind of reinforced that he is still young and raw and maybe not quite ready to step in. Vata took his goal really well against Feyenoord Victoria, and I thought Josh Dady impressed me anyway in his appearance. Though again, that was only against Feyenoord Victoria, so you can't. It would be. I think you can't obviously read a lot into the pre-season stuff in general, but the fact that these appearances were kind of against the team that was beat 7-0 and was very much not at the level of the other teams that Celtic played, you can't really use it, I don't think, to say, right, they need to be in, that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I would take that point. The other thing I would say too is that I'm not sure you can entirely judge them on the basis of one game either. They had a poor result last night. I think it would be unfair to make an assessment on one poor performance. I think you have to give it a bit more consideration. I think you have to give it a bit more balance than that. And I take the point. I think it's all very well, and I think what Stephen McManus was alluding to there was, you can't come in and burst a gut when you're given a first team opportunity in pre-season. You come in and it's hell for leather and trying to catch the eye and impress the manager, but then when you go down into the less glamorous surrounds of a game against Berwick Rangers, that you maybe take your foot off the pedal a wee bit. And I think that's probably what he was alluding to, and I think it's a fair comment. I think if you're at Celtic, there's an expectancy all the time. There's an expectancy about how you play and how you perform and what your mentality is and your approach to games. But I would still cushion that by saying I think you can't judge young players on the basis of one rotten night.
No, that's true. I mean, there's still a few comments coming in. Sean Malloy, the depth of the first team squad, he finds it difficult to believe that any of the B team will get close to the first team. Another comment here, echoing what you says, Darren Smith says that final step can make or break a player. And then Andrew Gillier with a really good point, which is you can create a pathway, which Celtic are obviously trying to do, but young players ultimately need to force the hand of coaches to play them. He uses the example of Harry Kewell at Leeds when he was a teenager. I think that's a great point. And I think it kind of reinforces what we're saying, that if the chance is there, you need to be in a position to take it. And that, as you rightly point out, that doesn't just mean talent-wise, it means mentally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kieran Tierney would be a really interesting example.
That's who I was thinking, yeah.
Kieran Tierney wasn't playing much. I think he was the second choice full-back at that level when Ronnie Dyla arrived at the club. He wasn't playing regularly for the under-19s, and then Ronnie Dyla and John Collins brought him into first-team training and identified talent that had gone unnoticed. And I think like that, the trajectory of his career only went one way, and I think that is very much about, there's an opportunity, are you good enough to take it, and can you embrace the mental challenge that comes with it?
I think that it's the mental part that made me think about Tierney as well, because when he talks about it, he admits himself he wasn't anywhere near it. He thought, like, I'm not even getting a game for my age group, that kind of thing. And then through circumstance, through whatever way you want to put it, he got the chance in training with Ronnie Dyla and stuff. And that's where the mentality thing came into it for me. You could tell he has a bit about him just as a person. And sometimes that can make the difference when you're trying to make that step into the first team. You're not overly fazed by the personalities and the players that are there in front of you, because you've got a lot. There's stories in football, not just with Celtic, of many a talented player who just couldn't quite get to grips with the life and the environment of being in amongst a first team with a lot of personalities. And Tierney was the first person that popped into my head there that not only got the chance and had the talent, but had that wee bit about him as well.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think the first team environment can probably be very intimidating as a young player. I think to go into it, I think it probably can be. I think you're there surrounded by seasoned professionals who have achieved things in the game. I think to walk in and find yourself in that company, I think if you overthink it, I think it probably could be very intimidating. And I think that's where it comes about trusting your ability, approaching every session, giving 100%, showing what you've got, and really giving it your best shot and seeing where it takes you. I think to go back again to Tierney, it wasn't just under Ronnie Dyla. He obviously presented himself under Ronnie Dyla, established himself at Celtic, but I always remember I think Brendan Rodgers had only been at the club for a month or two. I think it was before the season even started, and he talked about Kieran Tierney as one of the guys that had jumped out at him right away in the opening weeks of just watching training. And I think one of the very first press conferences, in fact, I think we were previewing the league games. I think we were speaking the day that the league fixtures were announced. So he hadn't really seen any game time. And he was saying, this boy is a boy that can go to the very top level. This boy can play. He's capable of going further than Celtic. He's capable of reaching real heights, and that comes down to application and approach, the right levels of aggression, in terms of just how you apply yourself on a day-to-day basis.
Attitude, isn't it, Alison, in a word? And I think you saw that when Ange Postecoglou came in with identifying and singling out almost Anthony Ralston and Greg Taylor as two guys who embraced what he was asking them to do from the get-go and showed a willingness to apply their attitude to it. And I think the two of them having thrived under Ange Postecoglou is a triumph of attitude as much as anything else, attitude and application.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I really do. I think sometimes it's about knuckling down. Sometimes it's about having the humility to accept that there are things you don't know. There are things that you need to learn. There are things you need to work on. There are things you need to go away and consider. There might be physical aspects that you need to work on. And I think it's about doing the boring stuff. It's about doing the unglamorous stuff away from what you see on a Saturday afternoon when you have the adulation of a big crowd. It's about turning up early to get your gym time in, or staying late to practice extra things, or if you're needing to bulk up, to go and do the kind of boring gym work. Just all the things, all the many facets that you don't see that make up training. And I think so much of it comes down to attitude and application. I always remember actually working at Celtic, and I think it would be like days after Stelian Petrov broke his leg, and he turned up. He was at the club at like 6:30 in the morning or something, because he wanted into the gym. He wanted to go and start on all his upper body work and stuff. Just that it is about attitude. It's about how you look at things, how you approach things. It's just about embracing the challenge and can you meet it?
Right off the back of that, I suppose we'll go back to first team matters, which is kind of what we touched on there as well. But although it's Aberdeen, Alison, that's first up on Sunday, the second game of the season has actually already been making headlines. The second game and the League Cup game probably. Celtic travelled to Dingwall to take on Ross County, and the Highlands Club has released a statement basically warning any Celtic fans who purchase tickets to sit in the home end at Victoria Park that they will be refused entry and refunded and stuff. That's the first bit, Alison, which I think we'll both say sounds probably fair enough. It's their prerogative. The second bit of the statement goes on to say that they are already cancelling purchase tickets by suspected Celtic supporters for the home end, and that only those who have ticketing history for home matches will be sold tickets. Now, that kind of confuses me just in terms of like how are they deciding what's suspicious, if you know what I mean. This won't be the first time away fans have bought tickets for home ends, hence why they're being proactive in trying to prevent it, I suppose. So plenty will have some sort of ticketing history, I would say. They want the ticket history that they want, as well as some actual county fans who won't go to games that often or are first timers because it's Celtic, because Celtic do draw those out. I suppose I've wanted a statement to say, are they looking fully into individual details and situations, contacting people, that kind of thing, to make sure, or are they just kind of presuming if you've only been to one or two games, you must be a Celtic fan and are almost unilaterally avoiding tickets? The statement doesn't really address that. However, what it does do, Alison, and this is important, arguably more important, is that it refers to members of their staff being abused in connection with cancelling or refusing tickets, which is obviously unacceptable, and for me is a wise up situation. And I'm sure it is to you as well, Alison. But ultimately, it is Ross County's prerogative, isn't it? Especially given it's the home end.
Yeah, I think what you would say is let's look for a common sense solution here. I think I can understand Ross County's point of view. If you maybe have Celtic supporters in with the home support, and then there's any contentious decisions, it can create fractures within the crowd, and maybe things can get a bit ugly. It has a potential to be a bit sour. So I think what you would say is offer tickets to your home support, see where you can sell them, collate your own support in one area of the ground, and if you have spare seats, it makes sense to try and sell them. Everyone wants to play in a full stadium. It makes sense for the club to have a full stadium financially. They benefit, players benefit from the atmosphere that it generates. I think it's about trying to find a proper solution and making sure that everyone who wants to go to the game has access to the game, has access to buy tickets. And if you can keep the crowds separate, then try and just make sure that they're separated. But I think it's a shame if you weren't going to sell out your full quota of tickets. It doesn't really make sense on any level, financially or in a football sense, not to try and fill the seats, even if it means maybe moving some of your supporters along from regular seats in order to accommodate more visiting supporters. I still think that would make sense.
Brendan Kearns basically kind of reiterating the financial side about he doesn't get why football clubs would want empty stands. It's their choice, but a loss in revenue. Where else? There was another comment there. If small clubs want to hit themselves in the pocket, it's their choice. Seems like shooting yourself in the foot. That kind of thing. Again, to me, it was just the statement just kind of confused me a wee bit with the kind of suspected element. Like, I just would like to have had that expanded on if they're actually checking every single case, that kind of thing, because there are fans that won't be going to a lot of games up there that might want to go to the Celtic one. But nonetheless, I know other clubs allow it, even welcome it actually, for the boosting gate receipts that it'll bring. But it's not obligatory. At the end of the day, it is their decision. But I tend to agree with you, Alison. I think a kind of compromise could have been found there.
Yeah, I think it's the clear and sensible way to go. I think the club wants to maximise revenue. Supporters want to get to the game. Both of these can be accommodated.
Right, I think before we go, a quick reminder again, guys, that we are running another Twitter competition, and this time it's the away top. So it's the same deal as before. You log on to your Twitter account, you retweet the post, follow the Celtic Way account, and that's you in the draw, which will be next Tuesday. So I will put the link in the comments that will take you directly to the post that you need to retweet, and then all you need to do at that point is follow the account. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll call it there for today, shall we, Alison? Thanks for your input, and also thanks for all your comments, guys. Always appreciated. Myself and Tony will catch you all here tomorrow. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Alison. Cheers.
Thank you.